Nathaniel Hayes is a man many admire, yet few truly understand. Despite his immense wealth and influence, a deep void lingers within him. A past tragedy has made him guarded, keeping genuine connections at bay. But one stormy night, he encounters twin girls in distress and decides to help them. This selfless act leads him to uncover something that will not only transform his life, but also fill the emptiness in his heart. However, upon returning home after ensuring their safety, he finds a mysterious note that sparks a journey filled with emotion, tenderness, and revelations. Before we continue, let me know which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story has reached. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more captivating tales like this every day. Raindrops streaked down the car windows as Nathaniel Hayes navigated the bustling streets of New York. The storm mirrored his turbulent state of mind. Despite his success, he couldn't shake the persistent ache of loneliness. His business thrived, but something essential was missing, a void no amount of achievement could fill. As he rounded a corner, something caught his eye. Beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, two small figures huddled together on the sidewalk, shivering in the cold. Nathaniel slowed and pulled over. Stepping out, he was immediately met by the biting wind and rain soaking his coat. Approaching the children, he saw they were twin girls, dressed in thin, inadequate clothing. Their faces were wet, not just from the rain, but from tears still streaming down their cheeks. "Are you okay?" he asked, trying to mask his concern. The braver of the two looked up and whispered, "We have nowhere to go." Nathaniel's heart clenched. He couldn't leave them there. "Come with me. Let's get out of this rain." The girls hesitated, but, overcome by exhaustion, finally agreed. He helped them into the car, turning on the heater to warm them as he drove to his mansion. Along the way, he tried to engage them in conversation, but they remained quiet. He introduced himself as Nathaniel and assured them he wanted to help. Slowly, they revealed their names, Emily and Grace. Though their answers were brief, he sensed there was more to their story than they were willing to share. When they arrived at the mansion, Nathaniel instructed Margaret, his longtime housekeeper, to care for the girls. "Give them a bath, find them warm clothes, and prepare something hot to eat," he said. Margaret, ever efficient, nodded and led the children inside. Nathaniel watched them disappear down the hall, his heart heavy. There was something about them, something he couldn't quite place. Later, as the girls slept in a guest room, Nathaniel stood in the doorway, observing them. Emily and Grace clung to each other, as if their closeness was their only source of comfort. Margaret, standing nearby, whispered, "They're so small, Mr. Hayes, and so grateful. They say you're a hero." He offered a faint smile, but felt a swirl of emotions he couldn't untangle. "They've been through a lot," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll talk to them and try to learn more about where they came from." After ensuring the girls were safe, Nathaniel retired for the night. The next morning, he left early to handle a pressing work matter, but promised himself he wouldn't be gone long. Hours later, the sunny afternoon contrasted sharply with Nathaniel's unsettled thoughts. He left the office early, his mind preoccupied with the girls. Despite his many accomplishments, something about Emily and Grace stirred a deep, unfamiliar feeling within him, as if fate had placed him in their path for a reason he couldn't yet grasp. Returning to his mansion, Nathaniel stepped out of the car with purpose. He expected to find the girls playing in the garden or with Margaret in the living room, but the house was eerily silent. No laughter, no sounds of activity, just an unsettling quiet. "Margaret," he called, his voice echoing through the halls. "Emily? Grace?" He searched the living room and dining room, but both were empty. Climbing the stairs, his heart began to race. Perhaps they were resting in the bedroom. He pushed open the door, only to find the room tidy and empty, save for a note on the pillow. His pulse quickened as he picked it up. The handwriting was simple yet delicate, likely one of the girls. "Thank you for looking after us. We need to tell you something." Nathaniel read the note repeatedly, trying to decipher its meaning. He scanned the room for clues, but found none. The closet was empty, and there was no sign of the girls or Margaret. Anxiety crept in as he called out again, his voice tinged with urgency. "Margaret? Grace? Emily? Where are you?" He hurried downstairs, checking the kitchen and other rooms, but the house remained silent. Even the garden was empty, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. Returning inside, Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, his worry mounting. Where could they have gone? Why hadn't Margaret informed him? And what did the girls need to tell him? The note felt like both a promise and a puzzle. Standing in the entrance hall, he tried to gather his thoughts. Something was amiss, but he sensed he was on the verge of uncovering it. Just then, a sound broke the silence. Light, carefree laughter. Nathaniel followed it, opening the door to the garden. The scene before him made his heart skip a beat. Margaret sat on the lawn, smiling, while Emily and Grace ran around, laughing and picking flowers from a nearby bed. A basket beside Margaret was already brimming with colorful blooms, and the girls looked genuinely happy, as if the pain of the previous night had vanished. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, watching in silence. There was something magical about the moment. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, now felt alive. The sound of laughter filled the air, a sound he hadn't heard in years. A warmth spread through his chest, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. Grace spotted him first. Her eyes lit up, and she tugged Emily's hand, pointing toward him. The two girls ran over, with Margaret following, basket in hand. When they reached him, they held out a small bouquet of flowers. "This is for you," Grace said shyly. "To thank you for saving us yesterday," Emily added. Nathaniel stared at the bouquet, momentarily stunned. He couldn't recall the last time someone had given him something so heartfelt, without expecting anything in return. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen and loved. Since losing his wife and son, Nathaniel's life had become a series of hollow days and lonely nights. The world seemed to see him only as a business magnate, nothing more. But these two children, offering him flowers as if he were the most important person in their world, stirred something deep within him. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to me." The girls smiled, but Nathaniel noticed a shadow in their expressions, something unspoken. He crouched to their level and asked gently, "You left that note in the bedroom, didn't you? You said you needed to tell me something. What is it?" Emily's smile faded instantly, her eyes welling with tears as she glanced at Grace. Grace, in turn, looked nervous, biting her lip and clutching her sister's hand tightly. Finally, Emily broke down, sobbing as she threw herself into Grace's arms. The two clung to each other, and Nathaniel's heart ached. He didn't know what could cause such pain, but he knew he couldn't push them. He took a deep breath, staying calm. "It's okay," he said softly, running a hand through their hair. "You don't have to tell me now if you're not ready, but I want you to know I'm here to help. Whatever it is, I need to understand so I can make the right decisions and keep you safe." The girls still seemed tense, but Grace gave a small nod. Nathaniel stood and looked at Margaret, who appeared just as concerned as he was. "Let's give them some time," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "For now, take them to freshen up and have something to eat. After that, I want them back here. We need to talk." Margaret took the girls' hands and led them inside, while Nathaniel remained in the garden, staring at the bouquet in his hands. His mind raced. Whatever the girls were hiding, it carried immense weight, something they feared revealing. He couldn't shake the feeling that their story was somehow tied to his own life. Who were Emily and Grace really? And why did their secret feel so urgent? The mansion, once cold and lifeless, now felt alive, but the mystery hung over him like a shadow. He knew patience would be key to uncovering the truth. Nathaniel sat in his favorite armchair by the fireplace, the crackling flames providing a stark contrast to the heaviness in his chest. He checked his watch. It wouldn't be long before Margaret brought the girls back for the conversation he knew they needed to have. The note and their behavior weighed on him like an unsolved riddle. Who were these children, and why did their story feel so pressing? When Margaret's footsteps echoed in the hallway, Nathaniel stood, instinctively straightening his jacket. The girls entered, still shy, their hair damp from their bath. They wore clean clothes that hung loosely on their small frames, but their expressions worried him. Though they had smiled earlier, they now seemed burdened by the weight of the world. They stopped near the sofa, exchanging nervous glances. Margaret placed a reassuring hand on each of their shoulders, encouraging them to sit. Nathaniel crouched to their level, offering a gentle smile. His voice was calm but sincere. "Emily Grace, I know you've been through a lot, but you're safe here. You can tell me everything. I need to understand so I can help you." The girls were silent for a moment, exchanging another glance. Emily clasped her trembling hands in her lap. It was Grace who spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't want to bother you, but we had nowhere else to go." Emily began to cry silently, hiding her face in her hands, and Nathaniel felt a lump form in his throat. He took her small hands in his, trying to offer comfort. "You're not a bother. You're important. I want you to tell me everything, but only when you're ready, okay?" Grace swallowed hard, fighting back tears. Finally, she began to speak, hesitantly but with determination. "We lived in a place, an orphanage." The words hung heavily in the air, laden with unspoken pain. Nathaniel didn't interrupt, letting her continue. "Our parents, they left us there. They were good sometimes, but they drank a lot, and they fought a lot." Emily lifted her tear-streaked face and added in a shaky voice, "They left us alone. Always. We'd get hungry, cold, and sometimes they forgot to come back." Grace squeezed her sister's hand, drawing strength from their bond. "One day, they took us to that place, the orphanage. They said they'd come back for us, but they never did. Never." The word came out as a desperate whisper, and Nathaniel felt a sharp pang in his chest, imagining two young children waiting in vain for their parents. He clenched his fists, suppressing his anger toward those who had failed them, but kept his focus on the girls. Emily continued, her voice breaking. "It wasn't good there. The people who ran it, they weren't like you." Grace nodded, her expression hardening. "They didn't love us. They didn't let us play or study. We just cleaned and washed clothes. For everyone." Emily interrupted, her voice desperate. "They said we were a burden, that no one would want us." Tears streamed down both their faces, and Nathaniel felt their pain like a weight crushing his heart. He reached out, gently wiping Emily's tears. "You are not a burden. You never were." Grace took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her voice still trembled. "We tried to hold on, but then we heard them say they were going to separate us." Nathaniel frowned. "Separate you?" Grace nodded, her eyes filled with pain. "They said only I would be adopted, that Emily would stay there." Emily sobbed loudly, unable to contain her anguish. "They were going to take my sister away from me, the only person I have in the world." Nathaniel took a deep breath, fighting the emotions swelling inside him. He didn't know what to say. Grace continued, her voice stronger now, as if determined to make their plight clear. "So we ran away. We waited until night and left. We were scared, but we'd rather stay together on the streets than be separated there." Emily looked at him, her eyes watery but filled with hope. "That's how we found you." The silence that followed was heavy. Nathaniel looked at the two children, so small yet so scarred by life, and felt something shift within him. He knew he had to act. Not just to resolve their situation, but to give them the love and protection they had never known. He took a deep breath, masking the emotion in his voice. "You're incredibly brave, you know that? You did what you had to do to stay together, and that's remarkable." The girls smiled shyly through their tears, but the weight of their story lingered in the air. Nathaniel stood, placing his hands on their shoulders firmly yet tenderly. "Now, I need you to trust me. I'll do everything I can to help. But to do that, I need to understand more about the place you came from." Grace hesitated, glancing at Emily, but finally nodded. "For now, I want you to rest or go play. We'll continue this conversation later, okay?" Emily hugged her sister tightly, and Grace returned the embrace. They both looked exhausted but willing to trust Nathaniel. Margaret led the girls back upstairs, while Nathaniel remained in the living room, staring into the fireplace. His mind raced. He had to act. Nathaniel couldn't let those girls be sent back to such a cruel place, let alone be separated. But what could he do? He had no experience handling such a delicate situation, yet he knew he couldn't fail them. Clutching the note he'd found earlier, he stared into the fire and resolved to do whatever it took to secure a future for Emily and Grace. The only question was, how? He sat in the armchair for several minutes after the girls left, staring at the flames as he processed their story. It was a tale of pain, loss, and injustice that he could barely comprehend. 2 children, so small and fragile, had endured abandonment and cruelty he couldn't fathom. A heavy weight settled in his chest, a mix of sorrow and anger. Why had fate brought them into his life? Why him? Why now? He didn't believe in coincidences, and something inside him whispered that there was a greater purpose to all this. Margaret entered the room quietly, noticing Nathaniel's troubled expression. She sat beside him and handed him a cup of tea, which he accepted absently, his gaze still fixed on the fire. "Mr. Hayes," she began softly, "those girls, they've been through so much, haven't they? I've never seen children so scarred by pain." Nathaniel nodded slowly, still lost in thought. "They didn't deserve it, Margaret. No child does." Margaret sighed, her eyes also on the flames. "What now? What are you going to do?" Nathaniel turned to her, his expression hardening as he made a decision. "I'm going to find a solution. I won't let them go back to that place. That's for sure. But I need help. I'll call Carter. He'll know how to proceed." Carter was Nathaniel's trusted lawyer, a practical and efficient man who had handled all his legal matters for years. If there was a solution within the law, Carter would find it. Nathaniel made the call, asking Carter to come to the mansion immediately. While they waited, Margaret stayed by his side, her presence a quiet comfort. She knew Nathaniel had a good heart, but she also saw how deeply this situation affected him. Since she'd known him, he'd always been reserved, but Emily and Grace had touched something in him, something he might not have realized still existed. Carter arrived an hour later, briefcase in hand and his usual serious demeanor intact. They sat in the living room and Nathaniel explained everything, from finding the girls to the abuse they'd endured at the orphanage. Carter listened intently, jotting notes on a pad. When Nathaniel finished, the lawyer leaned back, thinking for a moment before speaking. "Well, Mr. Hayes, the situation is complicated. Legally, custody of these children belongs to the orphanage. Any decisions about their future must go through them." Nathaniel frowned, frustration building. And how can they remain responsible after everything they've done? The girls were abused, Carter. That can't be allowed. Carter raised a hand, his tone conciliatory. "I understand your anger, and we'll report this to the authorities. But for now, you need to deal directly with the orphanage. I advise you to go there, speak with the director, and resolve this formally." Nathaniel exhaled sharply, clearly dissatisfied. What if they refused to cooperate? Carter hesitated. "In that case, we could file a lawsuit to have the girls removed permanently. But these things take time, and there are no guarantees." As they spoke, Nathaniel noticed movement in the hallway. He turned and saw Emily and Grace peeking from behind the slightly open door, their faces filled with fear. He realized they'd overheard enough to understand the gravity of the situation. The girls quickly retreated when they saw Nathaniel looking, but he was already on his feet. "Excuse me, Carter. I need to handle something. He found the girls by the stairs, Grace clutching Emily's hand tightly. Both looked tense, as if bracing for bad news. Nathaniel knelt in front of them, softening his expression. You heard, didn't you? Emily burst into tears, while Grace struggled to stay brave, though her voice trembled. Are you going to take us back there? The question struck Nathaniel like a blow. He shook his head quickly. No, it's not that. I promise I won't let anything happen to you. I'm just figuring out the best way to solve this, okay? Emily sobbed and clung to Grace, who looked at Nathaniel with pleading eyes. Please, Mr. Hayes, we don't want to go back. Margaret appeared then, drawn by the sound of voices. Seeing the girls in tears, she felt her own heart ache. She knelt beside Nathaniel and opened her arms. The girls immediately threw themselves into her embrace, seeking comfort. Emily whispered through her sobs, If he's going to take us back, will you help us escape? Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she hugged them tightly. Sure, my darlings. You're safe here, okay? Nathaniel felt a lump in his throat. He stood, stepping back to collect himself. The situation was more complicated than he'd imagined, and the girls' fear only made it more urgent. As he watched Margaret comfort them, he made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to ensure they never lived in fear or pain again. To do that, he'd have to confront the orphanage and settle this once and for all. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, but Nathaniel felt no warmth. His mind was clouded with anxiety as he drove toward the orphanage. Carter sat beside him, flipping through a notebook filled with legal notes. Though this was just an initial visit, Nathaniel couldn't shake the urgency he felt, especially after seeing the desperation in Emily and Grace's eyes. The orphanage was a drab, neglected building with peeling paint and dusty windows. Nathaniel parked and took a deep breath before stepping out. He had to stay calm and maintain the appearance of an ordinary visitor. This was about observation, understanding who he was dealing with. Inside, they were greeted by Mrs. Parker, the director, a middle-aged woman with thin glasses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She led them to a cold, functional room cluttered with old furniture and scattered toys. The air smelled musty, and the silence felt oppressive. No children were in sight. Mr. Hayes, Parker began with a forced smile, what brings you to our humble orphanage? Nathaniel kept his tone neutral. I'm considering adoption. I'd like to learn more about the process and, if possible, meet some of the children. Parker's smile widened, but it felt calculated. That's wonderful news. It's always a pleasure to see people interested in giving our children a home, Parker said with a practiced smile. What kind of profile do you have in mind? Nathaniel kept his tone steady, masking his true intentions. I'm open, but I'd like to adopt siblings, if possible, children between 7 and 10. I believe keeping siblings together is important. His answer was direct, but layered with hidden meaning. He knew Emily and Grace fit the profile perfectly, and this was his way of probing without raising suspicion. Parker hesitated briefly, but quickly recovered. We have some children who fit that profile, she said, adjusting her glasses. We even have 2 sisters, but unfortunately, they're unavailable at the moment. They're ill and isolated to avoid contaminating the other children. The lie was obvious to Nathaniel, but he kept his expression neutral. Carter, sitting beside him, took discreet notes, though his raised eyebrow betrayed his skepticism. I see, Nathaniel replied politely. I hope they recover soon. May I meet some of the other children then? Parker hesitated again, but before she could respond, the door opened and a woman walked in, interrupting the conversation. She had brown hair tied in a simple bun and a tired but determined expression. Her eyes carried a deep sadness, though her posture was resolute. Mrs. Parker, I need to speak with you, the woman said, ignoring Nathaniel and Carter completely. Parker sighed, clearly irritated. Now is not a good time, Olivia. I'm with visitors. I don't care, Olivia shot back, crossing her arms. I'm leaving. I can't work here anymore. The tension in the room spiked instantly. Nathaniel and Carter exchanged a quick glance, listening intently. Parker tried to maintain her composure, but couldn't hide her discomfort. Olivia, this is highly inappropriate. Please don't make a scene. A scene? Olivia's voice rose, sharp with indignation. What's inappropriate is what happens here day after day. I won't stand for it anymore. I'm leaving, and nothing will change my mind. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, absorbing every word. Parker's irritation was palpable, though she tried to mask it. You don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, though her tone remained controlled. We need committed people, Olivia, not unnecessary drama. Then find someone else to cover up your shortcomings, Olivia retorted. I've endured a year here. I can't do this to myself or the children any longer. Before Parker could respond, Olivia turned and left, slamming the door behind her. Nathaniel waited a moment, pretending to ignore the confrontation, then stood politely. Mrs. Parker, thank you for your time. I'll consider the process and get back to you. Parker forced a smile, clearly eager for him to leave. Of course, Mr. Hayes. I'll be happy to assist. Outside, Nathaniel and Carter spotted Olivia, hurrying toward the parking lot. Nathaniel quickened his pace to catch up. Excuse me, miss, he called out. Olivia stopped, turning with a wary expression. Who are you? She asked, her suspicion evident. Nathaniel Hayes, he replied. I was speaking with the director when I overheard your argument. May I speak with you for a moment? Olivia hesitated, but something in Nathaniel's demeanor seemed genuine. Finally, she nodded. What do you want? The truth, he said bluntly. What really happens in that orphanage? Olivia sighed, crossing her arms. It's not a home. The children aren't cared for or loved. They're exploited. They spend more time cleaning and working than being children. Nathaniel's blood boiled, but he kept his voice calm. What about the twins? Emily and Grace. Do you know them? Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, struggling to hold back her emotions. Yes, I know them. They were everything to me in there. I stayed longer than I should have because I couldn't bear to leave them alone. Nathaniel's chest tightened. There was something raw and genuine in Olivia's love for the girls. They're with me now, he said softly. They're safe. Olivia broke down, tears streaming down her face. Nathaniel stepped closer, gently touching her shoulder. Come with me. I want you to see them. She nodded without hesitation. When they arrived at the mansion, Nathaniel asked Olivia to wait in the living room while he fetched the girls. Emily and Grace were in their room, shyly playing with new toys Margaret had given them. When Nathaniel entered, they ran to him, hugging him tightly. I want to show you something, he said, smiling. They followed him, curious. When they reached the living room, Olivia stood nervously. The moment Emily and Grace saw her, they froze, their eyes wide. Olivia! They shouted in unison, sprinting toward her. Olivia dropped to her knees, pulling them into a tight embrace as tears streamed down her face. My little ones, I've missed you so much. Nathaniel watched the scene, feeling something he couldn't quite name. It was as if his home had finally found its purpose. He realized then that he would do whatever it took to adopt those girls. No matter the challenges, they deserved a home, and he would be that home. The next morning, Nathaniel called Margaret into the living room. She entered with her usual calm demeanor, but when she saw his expression, she knew something significant was about to happen. Margaret, I've made a decision, he began, running a hand through his hair. I want to adopt Emily and Grace. Margaret's face lit up. She let out a small cry of joy and, without thinking, hugged Nathaniel tightly. Oh, Mr. Hayes, this is wonderful, she exclaimed, tears in her eyes. Those girls already see you as family, and, if I may say so, I think you need them as much as they need you. Nathaniel smiled, touched by her words. He knew she was right. The girls had filled a void he hadn't even realized was there. "Thank you, Margaret. I'll need your help, as always. I can't do this alone." Margaret nodded resolutely. "I'm here for you, sir. Always." Nathaniel called Carter and Olivia for a meeting that afternoon. Carter arrived promptly, briefcase in hand, while Olivia seemed nervous but determined. It was clear Nathaniel's presence still made her uneasy, but her dedication to the girls was unwavering. "Well, we have a lot to discuss," Carter began, adjusting his glasses. "If Mr. Hayes is serious about adoption, we'll need to take immediate steps." Nathaniel nodded, leaning forward. "I want to do this legally. I won't risk the girl's future." Olivia, sitting beside him, spoke up. "I want to help too. I can't work at that orphanage anymore, but I won't abandon Emily and Grace. They mean everything to me." Nathaniel gave her a warm look, recognizing the depth of her love for the girls. "That's why you're here, Olivia. Your help will be invaluable." During the meeting, Carter outlined the steps for the adoption process. It would be a long, bureaucratic journey, but Nathaniel was determined. They also discussed how to address the orphanage's abuses. Olivia shared more details about the mistreatment she witnessed, and Carter assured her he'd file a formal complaint with the authorities. It was during this process that they uncovered a heartbreaking detail about Emily and Grace's parents. After investigating the orphanage's records and public archives, Carter revealed that their parents had died in a car accident shortly after leaving the girls there. The news was devastating, but it also solidified Nathaniel's resolve to give the girls the loving home they deserved. The discovery brought a mix of sadness and relief. On one hand, it explained the girls' abandonment. On the other, it meant no one could contest the adoption. Nathaniel shared the news with Margaret that evening, and they both mourned the tragedy the girls had endured. He decided not to tell Emily and Grace immediately, not wanting to reopen old wounds, especially now that they were beginning to feel safe and happy. As the legal process progressed, Carter managed to have Mrs. Parker removed from her position at the orphanage. Olivia's complaints, backed by other testimonies, were enough for the authorities to intervene. Nathaniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders, knowing other children would no longer suffer under Parker's care. Meanwhile, Olivia began visiting Nathaniel's home more frequently. At first, her visits were solely to see Emily and Grace, but over time, they became something more. She brought the girls simple gifts, books, games, and organized outings to the park or the zoo. Nathaniel watched these moments with admiration, marveling at how Olivia turned even the simplest days into something magical for the girls. The once cold and empty mansion was now filled with laughter and joy. Emily and Grace ran through the halls, played in the garden, and brought life to every corner. Margaret seemed more vibrant than ever, always preparing snacks and caring for everyone as if they were one big family. It was during this time that Nathaniel realized something that would change everything. He began to see Olivia differently. At first, it was subtle. The way she smiled at Grace's funny stories, or how her face lit up when Emily hugged her. But soon, it became undeniable. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't there, wondering what she was doing or what it would be like to have her there permanently. One day, during a picnic in the garden, Nathaniel noticed Olivia looked more radiant than ever. She wore a simple dress, but her eyes sparkled with a light he couldn't ignore. As she laughed at something Emily said, Nathaniel felt a warm spread through his chest. He realized he always looked forward to her visits, and when she left, the house seemed to lose some of its magic. It wasn't just the girls, it was her. Olivia had brought a new dimension to his life. Something he hadn't known was missing until she arrived. Nathaniel knew he was falling in love, but doubts and fears crept in. He had built his life behind emotional walls, and now they were crumbling. As he watched Olivia play with the girls that day, laughing and running through the garden, he made another decision. He needed to be honest with himself, and eventually with her. But for now, His focus was on securing a happy future for Emily and Grace. If fate had brought them together, he would trust time to guide him. That night, as the girls slept, Nathaniel stood on the balcony, gazing at the starry sky. Margaret joined him, carrying a cup of tea. "You seem different lately," she remarked with a knowing smile. Nathaniel chuckled, shaking his head. "I think those girls have changed my life, Margaret." She nodded, her gaze sharp. "And maybe it's not just the girls, is it?" Nathaniel didn't answer, but his smile said it all. The days at the Hayes mansion became a celebration of life. Emily and Grace, once burdened by fear and sadness, were now joyful children, exploring every corner of the house and laughing like never before. Olivia's constant presence brought even more light into their home. She had become an essential figure for the girls, almost like a second mother, always attentive and full of love. Margaret, watching closely, knew something special was unfolding, not just in the girls' lives, but in Nathaniel's heart as well. The adoption process was nearly complete. Nathaniel had spent weeks attending meetings, hearings, and filling out paperwork. Carter ensured everything moved quickly and smoothly. The truth about the orphanage, coupled with Mrs. Parker's removal, strengthened Nathaniel's case. The news of the adoption's approval arrived one sunny morning via a call from Carter. "Mr. Hayes, congratulations. You are now officially Emily and Grace's father." Nathaniel needed a moment to process the weight of those words. He thanked Carter, his eyes welling with tears. Margaret entered the room and, seeing his expression, understood immediately. "It's done, isn't it?" she asked, beaming. Nathaniel nodded, overwhelmed. "They're officially my daughters now." Margaret clapped her hands and ran to tell the girls. Nathaniel heard their excited shouts and laughter as they celebrated with tight hugs. He went upstairs and was greeted by Emily and Grace, who threw themselves into his arms. "Are we really your family now?" Emily asked, her eyes shining. Nathaniel stroked her hair, feeling the weight of unconditional love. "You've always been my family. We've just made it official." That evening, Nathaniel organized a party in the garden. Hanging lights glowed softly between the trees. Music filled the air, and a table was laden with the girls' favorite foods. Olivia arrived later, and Nathaniel's heart raced at the sight of her. She wore a simple blue dress, but to him, she looked stunning. "Congratulations, Nathaniel," she said as she approached. "You deserve all the happiness these girls have brought you." He held her gaze, feeling an irresistible urge to say what was in his heart. But it wasn't the right moment, not yet. During the party, Nathaniel noticed how Olivia interacted with the girls. She had a unique way of understanding their needs, bringing joy and comfort effortlessly. He realized Emily and Grace not only adored her, but considered her part of the family. At the end of the evening, as everyone relaxed, Grace took Olivia's hand. "Are you going to stay here with us forever?" Olivia glanced at Nathaniel, surprised. "Well, I'll always be around," she replied, deflecting the question. Emily frowned, clearly unsatisfied. "But we want you to live here. You and Dad are a good match." The word Dad hit Nathaniel like a wave. He was still getting used to the title, but hearing it from Emily while including Olivia made something in his chest shift. He laughed nervously as Olivia blushed. After the girls were in bed, Nathaniel and Olivia stayed in the garden, bathed in moonlight and the soft glow of candles. He finally found the courage he'd been building for weeks. "Olivia, I need to tell you something." She turned to him, surprised by his tone. "What is it?" Nathaniel took a deep breath. "Since you came into our lives, everything has changed. It's not just about the girls. It's about what you brought to me. I never thought I could open up to someone again, but you've shown me it's possible." Olivia's eyes glistened with emotion. Nathaniel stepped closer, gently holding her hands. "I've fallen in love with you, Olivia. I want you to stay, not just as someone who visits the girls, but as part of our family." Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she covered her mouth. For a moment, Nathaniel feared he'd made a mistake, but before he could speak, she hugged him tightly. "I love you too, Nathaniel. I always have." They kissed under the starlight, the wind whispering around them. It was a moment that changed everything. In the months that followed, the Hayes mansion became a true home. Nathaniel and Olivia began planning a future together, raising Emily and Grace as a family. The girls blossomed more each day, confident and secure in the knowledge that they were loved unconditionally. Nathaniel, who once believed his life was destined for loneliness, now saw the world through a completely different lens. Not only had he found a family, but he had also rediscovered himself in the process. On Emily and Grace's birthday, Nathaniel organized a grand celebration in the garden, inviting friends and everyone important in their lives. During the party, he made an unexpected announcement. "Today isn't just my daughter's birthday," he said, holding Olivia's hands. "It's the day I want to make something even more special official." He knelt down in front of Olivia, pulling a small ring from his pocket. The girls squealed with delight, and the crowd erupted in applause. "Olivia, you've brought light into my life and into the lives of my daughters. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she nodded eagerly. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Nathaniel kissed her to cheers and laughter, while Emily and Grace rushed to join the embrace. It was the day everything finally fell into place. The day all the missing pieces of their lives came together to form a perfect picture of love, resilience, and togetherness. The Hayes mansion, once dark and empty, was now a home filled with laughter, memories, and a happiness no one there had ever thought possible. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Don't miss the video appearing on your screen right now. Click to continue following stories that will touch your heart.